And the last subject I wanted to touch on today is the subject of beaming the warp, because I did part of this really well and the other part not so well. So the part I did well was getting an even tension, because after I had direct warped the loom and I was ready to beam the chains, after I had taken the yarn off the pegs, I was ready to beam the chains. I very carefully, and I could have done this with three, and in fact, I might do it with three when I redo it, which I'm going to have to do. Uh, Instead of doing the entire 25-inch weaving width, uh, kind of mushing it into one bundle and trying to beam the warp, I separated it into two. And it will, when I redo it, I'm actually going to use three. I might even use four, because 25 inches is a significant weaving width. I mean, that's almost the weaving width of a baby wolf. And I would never have tried to beam the warp just clumping everything together in one big mass to beam the warp. So at the very least, I divided my warp ends in two and looped them around these sport weights, which I then set on the floor so that I had tension coming more evenly, uh, and yarn coming more evenly around this warp beam. Uh, if you do it with one on a wide weaving width, your selvage ends are of necessity not going to get as much pull on them, and they're going to end up being longer. So even on a rigid heddle loom, if it's a, I would say if it's a 20-inch or wider one, it is worth separating. If you're using the full weaving width, it's worth separating the warp into separate bundles to beam it. And these workout weights are really inexpensive, and they don't take up much space, and they are, I still can't believe how much better my beaming goes with even just a small amount of tension. And if you're working with a short warp, this is a fairly short warp. This is 2.5 yards, if that. It might be 2.25. That's really short. When I beam the warp the next time, I can move. You can see my the pokey sides of my loom bench sitting there. I can actually put the loom bench in front of the cloth beam and set the ends of the warp chains and the weights right on the seat of the bench, and then I'll still be getting good tension up until practically the last, I don't know, 6 inches of the warp. The other thing I want to show you about this is the thing I did badly when I beamed this warp, and I'm going to be moving the camera around a lot. Sorry about that. Is I ran into this problem the last time I tried to use the full weaving width of this loom. I um, used a warp separator that went from one end to the other of the warp beam, and it was so thick because it's this corrugated cardboard. It was so thick that it was hitting the lock nuts that hold the ratchet dogs on the side of the flip. And I considered that to be less than desirable. So I made the mistake of cutting down my corrugated, and I made it too narrow. So you can see I've already, and even though I was trying to be really, really careful when I beamed the warp, so you can see that I've already got threads that have fallen off this warp separator. If I try to weave off this, I'm going to be miserable. It is going to be so unpleasant, and I'm likely to have a tragedy on my hands. I do not love the tragedy. So I have cut a new piece of corrugated cardboard, and I really enjoy using this particular stuff because it's got inch marks on here. So since this is such a short warp, probably I'm not going to run into hitting the lock nuts on either side of the loom, but there's no guarantee. Uh, and if that's the case, I'm just going to have to live with it. I'm just going to have to um, physically get up and advance and kind of mush this corrugated cardboard and do it again. or move things slowly until I have so little warp left that the cardboard doesn't hit those lock nuts. There are alternatives. There are thinner alternatives. If you like to weave long warps on your rigid heddle loom or on any loom, you don't have to use corrugated cardboard. Uh, I could, but I won't, switch to uh, unfolded uh, brown paper grocery bags that are unfolded and used, but I would need so many of them, even for a warp that is this short. I've seen many weavers recommend bamboo shades, roller shades for windows, and you just cut the bamboo slats apart, and you can use those to separate your layers of warp. And if I'm going to do, and I probably am going to do, a lot of full weaving width flip projects on this 25-inch flip, I'm probably going to invest in those in the not too distant future, because then I won't have this problem of so much bulk in my on the warp beam of my loom that it causes um, it hits these lock nuts on either side of the loom. So it's worth rebeaming. And if even if I had already tied on at the apron bar, the cloth beam apron bar, I would still take the time to undo it and do it right. Because seriously, I've had this happen where I tried to weave on a project where there had been warp ends that slid off the ends of the warp separator. It was just beyond awful because, yeah, it was beyond awful. And I lost a lot of yardage on yarn that I really loved. So learn from my mistakes, beam it right the first time. And if things fall apart and you didn't beam it right, it's not that big a deal. It will take 20 minutes at most, now that I've got a new warp beam separator cut, to unbeam this. And I'm just going to release the ratchet dogs on both sides. I'm going to pull my warp all the way off the warp beam and do it again with a wider warp separator. And then I'll tie onto the front and do my header. And then at long last, I'll get to start weaving. So I hope this has been helpful, especially if you're a newer weaver, to think about some of these aspects of weaving. The thing I've learned over and over again in weaving, as I've learned in knitting, is if you think you should unpick it and rip it out and do it again, you probably should. Otherwise, you're going to be frustrated with the finished results or with the process of continuing to make. So learn from my mistakes, do it right the first time, or redo it until it's right, and you will have a much pleasanter crafting experience.